Hi guys, welcome to the Tuesday night WSL weekly show. I'll be joined by Rob, a Chelsea fan who also does YouTubing as well. Does quite a lot of Chelsea work for CFC Women. Guys, if you're watching live, join the debate as always. Get your questions into Rob if you've got anything neutral or any Chelsea questions related. If you're watching on playback, we are live 7 days a week. Tomorrow night for the away fan chat show, I'll be joined by Manchester United to talk about Man U versus Leicester at the weekend. The Premier League prediction show returns Thursday with Tom. The pre-match show with Reedy on Friday to talk all things Leicester City ahead of Manchester United. The watch-along match day with Elijah is back from 2 p.m. The post-match aftermath show with Jamie will be live as well at 9:30. Then Phil will return for the Fan Zone show live next Monday. And Tuesday, the WSL weekly show will be back with myself. Guys, let's get going.
Welcome to Leicester Fan TV. Are you ready for the show? Thanks to our sponsors, ADT Taxis, Everards, Pukka Pies, Pink Car Leasing, Leicester Riders, Hollogram, The Fox's Arms, Peter's Pizzeria, Hope Against Cancer, and Newby Co estate agents. We want your views, we want your comments, so join us live. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday night WSL weekly show. I'll be joined by my guest very shortly. Before that, follow us at Leicester Fan TV, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat. Everywhere you can find us at Leicester Fan TV. Go and follow us. Guys, as always, we want your comments. We want your views. So join the debate and get involved in tonight's show. Smash a like. Share, subscribe to Leicester Fan TV if you're new watching tonight, as always. So yeah, let's get going. Let's get our guest in. Rob, how are you, pal?
I'm good, thank you, Jack. And yourself?
Yeah, good, thank you, Rob. So tell us what you do then for Chelsea Women.
So yeah, I'm a member of the team at the CSCW Social, which is a online platform. We're the largest Chelsea Women specific platform on Twitter. We've also got a presence on Facebook. We also do YouTube streams and a little bit of content on TikTok, although I'm too old for that, unfortunately, now. But yeah, sort of, all sorts of content, podcasts, written articles, a lot of edits, match day content. And yeah, really trying to sort of ramp it up and really push as much as we can sort of to promote Chelsea Women, because I think this is the same with Leicester, when you have two sort of elite sporting sides that you want to be sort of taken seriously and the ownership is taking them seriously like that, it's important, I think, for the fans to acknowledge and, recognise that as well and to really back that. And I think it's such an exciting period at the moment for women's football in general and the growth. So it's all about supporting that too.
Yeah, let's get a few good evenings in then. How you doing? How are you? Fee, we are fine. How are you? Carmen, hello. Gray, I'm good, thank you. How are you? LCFC Josh Morgan out. Well, out of their depth, says Patrick Hook. Mainly beat Leicester. Well, we're not going to talk about that. So then, Rob, let's get to know Chelsea as a football team then. Obviously, Chelsea Women, founded in 1992, playing at Kings Meadow in London. WSL champions 4 times, FA Cup Women's League Cup champions 2 times, Women's FA Cup winners, won that twice, and Women's FA Cup Community Shield winners once.
I'm also just going to add a
trophy record.
WSL Spring Series as well. Can't forget that off the list.
Yeah, in between won that.
In between moving, it was in between the move of WSL from being summer to winter, and they sort of did this bizarre spring series competition where some teams played each other twice and others played each other once. It was a very odd thing, but Chelsea actually went unbeaten through that. So I have fond memories of that one.
Yep. Rob, let's get on to the game then. Chelsea won 2-0. Harder and Kirby scored for Chelsea. What was it like then being there at Kingsmeadow on Sunday watching Chelsea versus Leicester?
I mean, it's always one of those things I would say that, like, I really love going to Kingsmeadow. I really like women's football in general. I think that it's a really nice atmosphere for fans that are starting to get into the game and sort of starting to really develop their interest. And I think, you know, it's just nice also how accessible it is. Tickets are a lot cheaper. And obviously I know Leicester, I believe I'm right in saying, have one of the cheaper tickets in the Premier League anyway. But for me as a Chelsea fan, it cost me more to get one single ticket this season than it did for my season ticket to Chelsea Women. So,
how much are the season tickets from Chelsea, if you don't mind me asking?
£44.99.
Ours is £40, so we're saving £4 something there.
Yeah. To be fair, to get to go and watch, for me, the champions of the WSL and that also includes, you know, I think Champions League group stage games, FA Cup games up, I think, until the quarterfinals, and also all of the games in the Conti Cup up to the semi-final. To me, that is sort of tremendous value, and I would pay £9 anyway for a ticket. So if I get to about 5 games in the season, I've broken even. We're the first, I believe, club in WSL history to sell out our season tickets this year. So that's quite exciting. And there is a strong core following from Chelsea, a really strong women's supporters group. But yeah, it was just really good in general to sort of have a good capacity there. The only thing I would say, and obviously this is, I think, a general issue across WSL, I think the league will get a lot better when proper away followings start happening, because I know the sort of racket Leicester City do make at all levels, and I think that's the kind of thing that we need to entice more teams out of their shell when they are playing away, because I think, you know, and this is no slight on how Leicester played, because I think they played the sensible tactic for the game, as we said before the call. I think if you'd have come out and played expansive football, you might have got a few plaudits in the opening, 10 minutes, but one fumble or one, loose area at the back, and then suddenly Chelsea are in, if they're scoring and, putting 4, 5, 6 past you.
Yeah.
Does it really, the fact you've passed out from the back and played expansive football, does it really benefit anything? And I said this last year to Bristol City women fans, is that they played some really good football the 2 times they played against Chelsea, really nice, playing out from the back, playing it through the lines. They conceded 14 goals in 180 minutes. And that, I think, is ultimately because there is a golfing class between the very top of the WSL and the teams that are lower down the WSL. You can't begrudge teams for coming and having tactics like that. Yeah,
true. So how do you think Leicester fared then against the champions on Sunday, Rob?
Leicester gave, considering, I think there's also aspects of Chelsea's performance that, it's worth analysing, because I don't think anywhere they were near firing on full cylinders. But Leicester, to me, gave one of the best away performances at Kingsmeadow I've seen in a long time. The last one I can remember being on a similar defensive level was the last game we actually didn't score at Kingsmeadow, which was a 0-0 against Birmingham. And that was due to an unbelievable effort at the time from Anne-Catherine Berger. And it was then subsequently the summer after that, Chelsea decided to sign Anne-Catherine Berger. So one suspects that was probably something of an audition. But I think Leicester did exactly what I expected them to do. Packed the midfield, made it difficult for Chelsea to play between the lines, because Chelsea really liked being able to do that. And they were able to sort of isolate for a lot of the time Fran Kirby. And I think that's a big thing, because when you sort of isolate her, especially when Kerr and Harder also aren't playing, Kirby is so much of the creative threat. So I think that was, the aspect of it. I have to also at this point give a mention to Kirsten Lavelle. I thought Lavelle was, brilliant, was my player of the match in general. I think Chelsea, gave it to Jessie Fleming. I thought Fleming was probably the best outfield player, but I think Lavelle's save from Sam Kerr especially is one of the best saves this season. And I think, she's going to be a big part of you, of your attempts to stay up this season.
Some very great saves from Kirsten Lavelle on Sunday. Outstanding. it was good to see. Obviously, Kirsten Lavelle, great goalkeeper. She keeps Leicester in a lot of games. And she's an unsung hero, shall I put it? She don't get the recognition she deserves. She's one of the best goalkeepers in the WSL, I believe. She's one of the best, and she proves it week in, week out with her saves. Some goalkeepers won't get to the saves that obviously Sam Kerr had that header. I don't think many goalkeepers would have got near that.
No, I completely agree, and I think it's difficult because I said this. You sort of sometimes when teams are struggling and when they do get relegated, they can be relegated with a really good goalkeeper. We saw it in the men's game last year with Sam Johnson, and saw it last year in the women's game with Sophie Baggerley. I think Baggerley is a fantastic goalkeeper, and I'm kind of surprised she's not playing more for Manchester United, if I'm honest, because I'd put her ahead of Mary Earps personally. But you ultimately, because of the position of it, is that you can have a really good game as a goalkeeper. Again, coming back to that Birmingham City one, I remember last year Hannah Hampton put in an unbelievable performance at Kings Meadow in that game and lost 5-0. And all 5 of the goals, she had absolutely nothing she could do about that, but she made about sort of 5 or 6 world-class saves that kept the scoreline down and kept it respectable. But obviously, it sounds a bit silly when you then go ahead and say, you know, you lost 5-0, but your keeper's the sort of player of the match.
I thought we defended really well. Ashley Plumpton, Gemma Perfield, Abby McManus, Georgia Broham, all put a shift in. I mean, Shannon O'Brien in that midfield, she was fantastic. Molly Pike. I think Leicester worked really hard against Chelsea. It was hard to break down Leicester for the long periods of the game. And I think Jonathan Morgan would be really pleased to see that fight and that determination to go and win every ball. And, you know, the big opponents of Chelsea, we didn't let that really bother us. We just got stuck in. And really, I thought we deserved more out of the game. But you've got to stay switched on at all times against a team like Chelsea. If you don't, you get punished in this league. I mean, Harder scored that pullback. And then Frank Kirby finished us off over the top. Sam Kerr wins the header, Kirby in 2-0. I mean, you know, we're 1-0 at the time. We threw everyone forward for that set piece, and then we just got punished on the break.
And I think, to be honest, that was the right thing to do, because I think if you didn't throw everyone forward and Chelsea just cleared it, you'd then be asking what might have been. Obviously, if the delivery comes in and, you know, you get the first header, lucky bounce in the box or a ricochet or something, you could very easily, you know, find it ending up in the back of the net and you're taking away a point. And I don't think it's unfair to say, I think Chelsea deserved to win the game, but at the same time, I don't think Leicester deserved to not take something from the game in a sort of a strange sort of quasi sort of analysis that is football. One thing I will say that I think maybe would be my only concern from a Leicester City fan, I agree 100% on the Emma Hayes point about managing in the men's team. She is brilliant. The only sort of concern I would maybe have is after I think there was such a clear sort of plan of keeping the teams out, and obviously you made subs to sort of try and keep it at 0-0. Once it went to the 1-0, it was so difficult to then sort of switch, and it did just look like everyone was just sort of flooding forward. And maybe that's the thing that Jonathan Morgan needs to work on, is that if you do go 1-0 down late on in a game, how do you also manage keeping that solidity while also going for a goal? And I appreciate that ultimately every time on a counter-attack, you will not be up against Sam Kerr and Frank Kirby, but even still, there are a lot of players in WSL who have the pace and the ability to punish you when they're given that much, you know, time and space on the break.
Obviously our attack ain't as good as yours, is it? Sam Kerr, Frank Kirby, you know, they're excellent players.
I will say one thing that's a real feather in Leicester's cap, and I think it will continue to be for a long time. I believe it's the latest time ever anyone's managed to keep out Kirby, Harder, Kerr.
Oh, is it?
I believe the 81st minute is the longest anyone has ever gone without one of them scoring. The only game in WSL, at least, in UWCL, obviously there was the Barcelona game, but I think Barcelona are the only team to stop one of them as well. So if nothing else, you can claim that record with FCB Femini, which is not a bad thing to be in company with. The thing I think that will also give Leicester sort of heart from the game is that in Chelsea's ability to dominate possession, and one of the things that I think is really underrated for Chelsea is their ability to pick up loose balls and to sort of choke teams in. and to keep them penned inside their half.
Yeah.
And I think against other teams in WSL, you won't face that kind of constant press and control because they won't be able to do that. I mean, the only one at Arsenal are able to do it, Manchester City on a good day, probably United on a good day, probably. But the rest of the league don't have that capacity to do it. And there are going to be opportunities where they give them up, and then it's going to all be about taking those opportunities when they come. And, you know, even if it's a case of converting one of those and then taking a more defensive shape, maybe that's the thing that needs to be done a little bit more.
Yeah. Guys, if you're just joining us, smash a like. If you're enjoying the show so far, getting a great insight into Chelsea, which is good to see. Subscribe to Leicester Fan TV. Go and check out Rob's channel as well. It'd be great. We'll put that in the description. So go and check that out. So then, Rob, another goal from the mini Messi then at the weekend. We all know what Fran Kirby can do when she's in front of goal. 9 times out of 10, she'll finish. And she's got an excellent goal-scoring record, and she's well known for it in the WSL as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, as I've sort of said, Chelsea having the ability to sort of call on Fran Kirby, Pernilla Harder, Sam Kerr off the bench is a bit like when you're playing FIFA and you decide that the game's a bit too hard, so you turn the sliders up. That's my comparison I always use, because they play on such a different level, and I think the connection that Kirby and Kerr have is, in a sort of way, it is almost telepathic. They always just seem to know where the other player is. I will say this year, for me, the big thing Chelsea needed to do was get more out of Pernilla Harder. That sounds ridiculous when you consider last season, I think she got something like 8 goals and 8 assists in sort of 31 sort of appearances in all competitions, which isn't bad for a midfielder. But knowing what Harder can do at her absolute best, knowing her goal-scoring record for Wolfsburg, her UWCL goal-scoring record, which is something like 78 and 81 or something ludicrous like that. Like, I said that if Chelsea can harness that extra aspect of it, then you're going to get to a point where, even if they keep out Sam Kerr and Fran Kirby, you've got Pernilla Harder there who has that ability. And one thing I really like seeing was actually the cutback, because she makes that run so many times, and so often we float crosses to the back post or float them deep. That low cross towards the edge of the box, I think it's a really underrated sort of skill, is being able to arrive in that area. Again, I've got very used to it, and I'm probably biased in that I used to watch Chelsea men's and watch Frank Lampard do it all the time and arrive just inside the box ready to sweep it home with that sort of finish. But I think it's something that a lot of it's priceless when you have it in the team, but you don't always recognise that you have it. And certainly, I did notice Jessie Fleming. It was quite interesting to see that she was trying to find Pernilla Harder almost as much as Kirby and Kerr were trying to find each other. So I think that's an interesting partnership that's blossoming as well.
Rob, let's talk about the partnership then of Kirby and Kerr. KK partnership, shall we call it? A lot of goals scored this season between them, and they have been for a while. Obviously, them two know each other in and out. They'll know where each other's going to be at all times. What's it like watching them two week in, week out?
I'd say, to be honest, it's one of those things I feel I'm in a really lucky position to be able to watch that. And there's two sort of points. Number one, I have to say, I do feel a bit sorry at times for Beth England, because Beth England is a top striker in WSL. A brilliant player. She works really hard off the ball. She grafts for everything. She's a real grifter, and she does finish and score as well. However, when Sam Kerr came in, you could see the difference and the slight step up in quality, in that Beth England is very good. Sam Kerr is world class. It took her a couple of games to get going in WSL, but I think it's now something ridiculous since sort of 31 goals in 34 appearances and 10 assists since she's come into WSL. It's just nuts numbers. And a lot of the complaints I often hear about Sam Kerr from Chelsea fans and from other fans who watch it is that she's not clinical. If a striker that's not clinical is going to score me 31 goals in 34 and get 10 assists, then I will quite happily take them not being clinical. It seems like absolute, analysis for the sake of it. As for Fran Kirby, there's not much more I can say that hasn't already been said. I mean, at times I do think she gets a bit of a preferential treatment from the media and from some sectors of the fans because she's so popular in the women's game. But then, you just see things like the other day where she's just in the right place at the right time to score the goal, or she's just there, to create the goal. And so often she's just, consistently world class. consistently brilliant. I mean, I think 16 goals and 12 assists last year in WSL. I mean, it's sort of ridiculous numbers that, a striker would be happy with 16 goals, but playing off, sort of Sam Kerr. And as I said, if you can get a situation this season where Pernilla Harder, Fran Kirby and Sam Kerr can all be scoring around, the 18 to 20 mark, then Chelsea are going to be in sort of some position come the end of the season, in a real position of strength. I will also say, like Kirby, the fact that she came back from pericarditis, which if people aren't aware of it, I recommend reading up the stories of it. She did a really candid video about it herself on the Chelsea YouTube channel about coming back from fitness and sort of discussed it. And it's amazing she's come back from something that's so debilitating and can end careers and is now arguably playing the best football of her career.
Yeah.
Should she win the Women's Ballon d'Or? I've been in various debates for this in the last week. I'm going to have to say no this year, because I think if Chelsea had won the Champions League final, I would say 100% yes. But I think it has to be a Barcelona Femení player, because Chelsea and Barcelona had very similar records in the league and in the domestic cups, and that was the one separator. So I think it would go to Alexia Putellas, but I think that Kirby definitely should be second.
Yeah. Who was your woman of the match then for Chelsea and Leicester, if you had to pick from both sides?
Oh, yeah, I think probably I'm going to have to give it to Lavelle, because I think if Lavelle hadn't played as well as she did, I think, that Sam Kerr header, for instance, if that had gone in, I think Chelsea could have gained more confidence. It would have been harder for Leicester to keep the defensive shape, and you might have seen a few more goals going in the second half. Don't think she could have done anything with either of the finishes. Again, the first one, Harder, just placed it excellently into the corner. The break goal, I mean, that sort of goal on the break, you don't expect a keeper to save that one. That was one. I think from Chelsea, the real positive for me was Jessie Fleming. She had a lot of energy in the midfield, real sort of dynamism and tenacity, and even continued having that from the deeper role. Obviously got the assist for the opener as well. I think that's the other thing I said at the start of the season. Chelsea's big challenges this year are unlock Pernilla Harder and Jessie Fleming, because although they were signed last season, we didn't see the best of them. And now they are looking like two brand new signings that are one who's a very, very good young player with the potential to be world class, and one that is just a world class operator.
Yeah. Emma Hayes then, 100th win for Emma Hayes. Is that in the WSL or is that in all competition?
I believe that's in WSL. I think the 100th win in all competitions, came last year. I recall it may have been it may have actually been the Conti Cup final last year, because I remember not much being made of it because of the scoreline in the final, obviously being sort of 6-0 and being a bit of a sort of steamrolling. She didn't really want to take the claim of it. But yeah, there's not much more again I can say about Emma Hayes, a legend of the women's game. Yeah. Rightly inducted into the WSL Hall of Fame. I think, to be honest, I would at some point love to see her managing the men's game, because I think it would, I think it would go really, really well. Brilliant sort of tactician at times. I think perhaps you would say she's not necessarily the most, in terms of technical astute, not sort of completely like a, real sort of technician of the game and a real sort of master, but just the connection that she has with players and the ability to bring out the best in players while also remaining in charge, I think is something that's really, really undervalued in football. And that ability to be one with the players, but not be one of the players.
Yep. Rob, what's your views on Leicester City then? Have you watched them this season?
Yeah, I have. I watched a bit of you last season. I watched a bit of you in the Championship, and again, congratulations on the promotion. I think it's always important. I've said this to a couple of people when discussing it. I think it's always important to recognise when a team does get promoted to WSL, because it's not an easy league to get out of.
No.
In the same way, the Championship in the English game is not easy to get out of. The WSL Championship is really not easy, and there are a lot of big names and big hitters in there that shouldn't be, down there. Cough, cough, Liverpool. But are really should be elite footballing institutions. And I could rant about Liverpool for a long time, but I'll focus on the positives. Leicester, I think, are doing it the right way. They are, they're really investing in the community. They're investing in the spirit. They've got a very sort of, I think a really good squad that they had in the Championship, and they bolstered it with some sensible additions. I think, there wasn't much more they could do in the summer window based on the fact that you're coming up and there's obviously, budget constraints, what have you. I will say that I think, for me, the concern is where the goals are going to come from. I think if you keep that solid defensively against some of the other sides in WSL, you'll have no problem keeping them out. And I think the clean sheets will start to come. I think, it's been a bit of a baptism of fire, but they will start to come. And the fact that, you were able to hold the champions to a clean sheet for 80 minutes, which a lot of other teams, can only dream of doing. Even, the likes of your Cities and Arsenal, they, will rarely manage to do that. It should be a big feather in the cap. But at the other end, I think Sigsworth is a good, I think she's a good focal point. I think she's someone who, can hold the ball up, but she does lack that little bit of extra, that yard of pace or that little bit of guile. I think she needs someone up alongside her. And if you maybe put someone up alongside her, it's a bit quicker, a little bit of a finisher. Sigsworth is a good footballer. She's an intelligent footballer, and I think that could work really well.
Yep. What are your predictions for Leicester this season then? Will they go down, or do you think they'll stay up?
I mean, it's so early in the season. I think it's like, it's worth noting at the moment that I've seen sides make worse starts and survive. Yeah. I've seen sides that, after the first couple of games were in the top, 2 or 3 and go down. Ultimately, I think it will be a bit of a struggle and a bit of a slog, because I think, it always is in the first year after you get promoted in any sort of competition. Again, I'm sure as a Leicester fan, you will remember your first year back in the Premier League and sort of what the way that ended up happening. But I think ultimately the important thing is to not lose hope and lose heart. And even if you do get, relegated again, to keep doing it and keep doing what you're doing. Because I've seen far too many teams that have gone down, in Bristol City, one of those this season, where they've gone down and they've had the squad sort of gutted, but they've then completely tried to rebuild everything. And they've started the season poorly in the Championship, and it's difficult, then to sort of suddenly the title charge is over, and it's sort of, where do we go from here? So I think overall, I'll be optimistic. I think Leicester will. I think you'll start to put some points on the board, and I think there will be other sides that will sort of start to fade off. In particular, I'd be worried about Birmingham. Would be my sort of one I'm quite worried about. I think that Birmingham are. I've seen them in the cup against Chelsea, and for about 45 minutes they were all at it, and then one goal went in and the heads went down and it just completely dropped. And that's the thing I've noticed with Leicester, is that when a goal goes in, the heads don't drop immediately, and there is a bit of regrouping maybe, and it is a school of hard knocks, WSL. Yeah. But I think if you can pick up points in those games and not necessarily get sort of the goal difference too far in the other direction, that's what's going to be the key thing about staying up. And once you've stayed up for a couple of seasons, you start to get the infrastructure in place. You look at Brighton again. Brighton looked like they were dead and buried at one point last season. Got a very good manager in Hope Powell, sort of put the infrastructure in place, got the right signings, and trusted the players. And now I'm pretty confident to say they won't go down this season. They're going to finish comfortably in mid-table and continue doing the excellent work they're doing.
Yeah. Rob, let's talk about predictions then for Chelsea Women in the WSL. Where are you going to finish?
Somewhere in the top 2, but I'll refuse to say what order in the top 2. It's such because of Manchester City's poor start to the season, which I don't think anyone saw coming. It's a situation now where Chelsea are in a strange situation, in that unless they have a monumental collapse as well, they're going to finish somewhere in the top 2, because they are superior in terms of resources, in terms of management, than so many other teams in the league. And it's just the natural hierarchy that is there. The gap is getting closer. I keep saying this, Tottenham look like they've, under Rhian Skinner, have started to regroup and are focusing on making themselves tough to beat, which is what I always say is a prerequisite for the sides that are, looking to topple the likes of your Chelseas and Cities. The hardest games Chelsea and City usually play last year were the likes of Brighton and Reading, who didn't make it easy for them. And the easier games were the ones against the likes of Everton, where they came and tried to be expansive, because being expansive is playing sort of into their hands. I think, Chelsea will be disappointed if they don't win the league again, because of the fact that the squad hasn't really changed from last year. We've added Lauren James, who sort of hasn't really featured too much yet, but is a top young player. Aniek Norman, who played at the weekend and, is a very good young defender sort of from the Dutch league. Blundell leaving, I think it was the right time for her to go. On a personal note, it was very sad to see her go, because she was a huge supporter of the CFCW social, engage with a lot of her content, and I'm delighted to see her doing well and playing football again at Manchester United. But I think, ultimately, from a Chelsea fan perspective, after losing that first game at Arsenal, what you'll be looking at is not dropping points again until we now play Arsenal again at Kings Meadow, or potentially at Stamford Bridge if they choose to play there, and then winning that game. Because I think if we can do that, we can be confident enough that we can outscore them and outgun them and get the goal difference far enough ahead. It's then just making sure that you don't drop silly points elsewhere. And that's where I think this year the WSL will be won and lost, is when teams start to drop silly points and like, City, for example, dropping points against Tottenham and dropping points against West Ham. Suddenly, 2 losses, and it sounds silly, but their title charge is over. And because of how quickly teams put points on the board and how quickly gaps start to develop. And that's the only thing I would say that's my concern for Leicester, is that I think it's important to put points on the board soon, just to give you that bit of a foothold. And once you get, the goals and you get the points, the confidence starts to flow again and players start feeling better about themselves.
Yep. Rob, question then. Would you prefer the WSL this season or the Women's Champions League?
The Champions League, because it means we'll have beaten Barcelona at some point, and I really want to knock them off their perch. It's difficult. On one hand, the Barcelona game is a really tough one for me to look back from an analytical point of view, and I had to do an analysis on it. It was the most painful one because Chelsea had more shots, had more had actually a higher XG in the first half, amazingly, and yet at half time they were 4-0 down. And I looked at this game and thought, how on earth are we going to have... And Barcelona are an incredible side. Like, if you get a chance to watch them, I would 100% recommend putting it on. La Liga Femenina, the issue that they do have is that Barcelona are so ahead of everyone else at the moment that everyone has got to play catch-up. I think they've got something ludicrous like they had plus 35 goal difference from 5 games or something utterly absurd. But you can't hold that against them as a team. Ultimately, we've seen elite teams before. We've seen Lyon put 10 past teams before. I think the fact that we've won the WSL before, I really prize the WSL still, and this is why I don't really like comparing trophies, because I think once you start to get to that stage and you start saying, I'd rather have X and rather have Y, you get yourself in a really dangerous situation, because you should never be, every bit of silverware should be memorable, because ultimately there have been times in the past, and there will no doubt be times in the future where your team aren't winning silverware. And I'm very lucky in that as a Chelsea fan, I've lived through the club's most successful period of the history. But I know people that will tell me all about the dark ages in the 80s where, we were playing in the old Division 2 and nearly being relegated out of football altogether, or being in the old Division 1, being relegated to Division 2. So I never like taking for granted any trophy, and anything Chelsea wins, I will shout it from the rooftops. And that's also whether it's men, women, youth, because ultimately, if you're an elite sporting institution, once you get one trophy, you shouldn't rest on your laurels. It should be, we've won one, when are we going to win the next one? And I think that in a way, again, as much as it's painful for me to say as well, that in a way is what I like about Leicester City men when they won the league, is that they didn't accept, everyone called it a fluke, but they didn't accept behind the scenes it was a fluke. And I don't like the idea of it being called a fluke, because you can't fluke a 38-game season. In the same way that if a team struggles, Arsenal, for example, did not fluke not qualifying for Europe last year. It's because of a sum of the whole thing. And it was good to see that Leicester, did push on and obviously won the FA Cup last summer. I will admit I am slightly, happier with that, because Chelsea then did win the Champions League 2 weeks later, which did checker my view somewhat. But I like the fact that Leicester have gone on to look to try and win other trophies. And I think that's what you need to build that mentality in. And I think that's probably, in a way, moving back to Leicester City Women, the trophy this year needs to be staying up. Because if you are staying up this season, that's a real achievement, because no one's giving them, I think, the time of day. And I've spoken to a lot of people, and they tend to say, isn't it nice to see little old Leicester up in WSL, but they're going to go straight back down. And if you can give those 1 or 2 bloody noses and get the points on the board, then suddenly safety actually gets an awful lot closer. And that's the thing I think, you really need to focus towards.
Rob, let's quickly look at the other results then. Manchester United and Manchester City drew 2-2 at the weekend. Brighton beat Tottenham 2-1. Reading won 3-0 against Villa. That'll give Reading massive confidence now. Arsenal beat Everton 3-0, and West Ham drew 1-0 with Birmingham. One point for Birmingham now. Let's quickly look at Team of the Week. So we've got Lavelle in there.
Yeah, wouldn't disagree with any of those names in there. That looks like a pretty, make a solid case for all of those. Slightly surprised that they've only got one Leicester defender in. Again, I know McCabe did score, but I kind of feel that Purfield's unlucky not to be sort of featuring in there. Although I wasn't quite sure if she was playing fullback or playing sort of further forward, but covering so much because of the formation.
Yep. Let's quickly look at the table then. Arsenal leading by 3 points with a goal difference of 17. Chelsea have 12 points with 12 points goal difference. The bottom, you could say it's very tight. Reading, Birmingham, Leicester. It's when Leicester's going to get that first win. I think, if we can keep playing the way we're playing, the results are going to come, and so are the points.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And I think that's the big thing for me, is when teams are down the bottom of the table. What I don't like seeing is, there are two things I really hate seeing when a team starts the season poorly. Number one is the manager getting the boot, especially when there's someone who has got you, promoted and done so much good stuff for the side. I think that it's difficult, obviously, because you go from winning games to losing them, and it's never nice to lose a game. So I think that's one of them, and I think in a way, it's when they do that, it's not acknowledging the fact that maybe the players are not necessarily not good enough, but aren't necessarily adapted to the league, and it's sort of a bit of a coward's way out. The other one I really don't like is when a team completely changes the tact of how they're playing. I really wouldn't like to see Leicester start to play a very negative defensive style, especially in some of the games against other opposition, like the likes of West Ham, Birmingham, Aston Villa, even Brighton, because I don't think it'll suit you very well, and I don't think it's good for the structure of the team, really, and also the morale of the team. Like, there's one thing to be said for grinding out a 1-0 win, and I think, if you're getting your first points on the board that way, that's fine. But just continuously doing that, it wears you down. And then when you then do have a big loss, it's very hard to then get back on the saddle. Whereas at least if you're in games, you're being competitive, you're being tight. And I think I'm right in saying that besides the cup game against Manchester City, although you've got that -11 goal difference, that's more due to the fact that you haven't scored many, rather than the fact that you've conceded a lot. And that's what I'd say is, being tough to beat and making those difficult goals, sort of, cutting out these simple goals and the easy goals. When you start to do that, and then you can start making yourself more solid, get the first points on the board, and then go from there, really, and try and kick on.
Rob, let's look at the top scorers then. Sam Kerr leading the way at the minute with 5 goals. Vivian Medema of Arsenal, Kim Little, Frank Kirby, Katie McCabe, Beth Mead, and Pernille Harder.
It's pretty much just Arsenal versus Chelsea, as always. I agree. Yeah, I agree with that one from Willie. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's really, one thing I will say is it's great to see the amount of support that your fans are giving to the women's side. I really respect that, and I think the players really appreciate that. And one thing I'll say that I really appreciated going down to Kings Meadow at the weekend is, at men's games, obviously you get players coming around and applauding and stuff at the end, but you don't have that accessibility to them. I was able to at the end of the game, when she came over, get a sort of photo with the 2-time Ballon d'Or winner, record UWCL Golden Boot winner, Pernille Harder. And it's that sort of accessibility you just don't have in the men's game. So I wouldn't really urge
there's more of an acknowledgement and more of a bond between the fans and the players in the women's game. I mean, in the men's game, you could say they're all wrapped up in cotton wool, shall I put it?
Yeah, no, exactly that. And I won't say said player's name because she might get in trouble, but there are certain players that are in the CSW social sort of DMs regularly, and we sort of chat to them, and we have good, engagements, good banter with them. And when we've tried to interview men's players for the main ones, or even youth team players, we've been met by an absolute wall of, red tape and jargon. Oh, you can't do that. We can't have them say that.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Whereas where you go to the women's players and say, yeah, sure, when do you want to do a Zoom meeting, or do you want to do it over WhatsApp or whatever? And it's such a, I think it's so accessible. I also say, if you have, I think, particularly, again, obviously this is not really to me at the moment because I'm still quite young, but if you've got young children and you've got children who've grown up, I think, loving football but not really having the accessibility and the chance to see role models, it's such an exciting time to be in the women's game because it's getting so popular. There's the Euros next summer, which, if people haven't got tickets for, I would already advise you going and looking at that. Some great, teams going to be playing. There'll be some great atmospheres. It won't be like the men's one where you've got bricks pelted at you. But I think, it's such a, really great time to be a football fan. And it's really great time to be a women's football fan. And I would, just really urge everyone to, where possible, support the side because it might sound cliche, but every single supporter that, goes in there goes that extra bit to growing the game and growing it more and more. And with the new TV deals sort of making it more, not accessible, but making it more sort of mainstream and widespread, I think it's more important than ever to be backing it.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of coverage now, aren't they? Sky Sports, BBC, they're making the women's game more bigger, and it should be, All we've ever been talked about is the men's game. It's only really been looked at one side of it. I mean, the women's game is making their voices heard now, and it's becoming more of a bigger thing, which is very good to see. And it's good to see the fans are interacting with the women's game as well. And young kids who dream to be that footballer one day, if they can do it, so can I. So it gives them that dream to dream big, and whatever happens, you can achieve it in the end. Let's look at the Lionesses team announced then, Rob. That got announced today. Mary Earps of Man United, Hannah Hampton, Sandy Massiva, Millie Bright of Chelsea, Jess Carter, Niam Charles, Rachel Daly, Alex Greenwood of Manchester City, Demi Stokes, Lottie Wooburn-Moy, Jill Scott of Manchester City, Georgia Stanway, Lucy Stanforth, Kira Walsh, Leah Williamson, Katie Zellum of Man United, Bethany England of Chelsea, Lauren Hemp, Frank Kirby, Beth Mead, Nikita Paris, Aliessa Russo, Ella Toon, and Ellen White.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those squads you look at on paper and think, wow. But the issue is, in the last few years, the women's side, England women, have had a really great side on paper. But as we both know, football's not played on paper. And like now with Serena Weigman in charge, there's a world-class manager in the dugout. And I think we should be looking to win the Euros next summer. I've said this to a few people, and people have gasped and said, oh, what about Spain? What about X? What about Y? What about the Netherlands? What about the US? Not the USA, but what about the Netherlands, etc.? And what about Denmark as well with Pernille Harder? But I think that with the crop of players we've got coming through, we haven't quite got a golden generation yet because the infrastructure isn't there at youth level. But there are some absolute world-class, players in there, the likes of sort of Kira Walsh, Williamson, Hemp, Kirby. I'm a bit surprised at seeing Paris recalled, but Paris is a very good player as well. And there are some real top WSL players in there as well at a similar sort of level. And it's now getting them to play well together, because that's what's been the issue in the past. I don't know if you watch much of England and sort of the Lionesses, but there's
I do. Yeah, they battered quite a lot of teams, didn't they, last time around with a new manager?
Far too often, the issue is when it comes to the big games. I don't necessarily know if it's a fear sort of thing, but there's like a freezing on the big stage, and it's surprising when these players are players that have been there and done that at WSL level. But I think there's something a bit different when you're playing for your country, and it's we've seen it a lot in the men's game. I'm not going to pretend suddenly that this is sort of unique to them, but it'll be really interesting to see how Serena Weigman does end up doing it, because I think she'll start gradually thinning the squads a little bit. That's quite a big squad she's called up this time round. I think it's a 26-person squad, and next summer it's only going to be 23. So at least 3 of those are going to miss out. So it's all about, for me, really starting to get that first 11 in place and that real core first 11. And then I think building those players around it that are good enough to step in if your first 11 isn't there. But personally, I'm one of those people who, and again, this is maybe a bit of a dinosaur at international level, but I believe, although it is a squad game, you should always have a first 11 that you want to pick. And a first 11, you should always know who your top goalkeeper is for your country, your top right back, your top centre backs. And if they aren't around, then you should have 8 capable deputies. But it shouldn't, and they, if they can stake a claim, that's great. But you shouldn't suddenly be in a situation where you're looking at them and say, well, 1 or 2 of them are very good players, but I'm not sure that that one of them is really staking a claim and being world class. I mean, there's obviously names who are missing from the squad due to injury at the minute, the likes of Roebuck, Lucy Bronze, Jordan Nobbs, which I'm very surprised by because I think she's a fantastic player. And also Steph Hawson as well, who all of them have had a pedigree in the past. Yeah. And you'd expect them to walk back in, and certainly in previous managers, we've seen that, selection's been very much on who you are rather than what form you're in. And I hope
you get that in the men's game quite a lot, don't you? It's the name of the player and not the performances they're putting in, week out.
Exactly, and this is why I quite like, again, as much as it hurts me for enough, this is why I quite like Italy's Euro 2021 win, because Mancini went round every single club in Serie A and Serie B and watched every single one of them and picked the best players for the system and what he wanted to do, rather than picking the top names that just at all of the clubs. And that is what far too often we've not done, both with the 3 Lions and with the Lionesses. And I still think it does happen at this moment in time. Players aren't being picked because they're on form. They're being picked because, they play for big clubs or they're big names. And until we can get over that malaise, I don't think we're going to win anything.
Yep. A big shout out to Sophie Howard. Congratulations, Soph, on making the Scotland international team today. So big shout out to you. I believe a Chelsea player made it today as well, didn't they, Rob?
Yeah, Erin Cuthbert in the Scotland squad, which she'll no doubt be very proud to sort of say on Twitter. She's a very passionate Scot and is an extremely colourful character, actually. I would recommend, if you want to follow one member from the 2 members, actually, from the Chelsea women's squad, follow Erin Cuthbert and Zakira Musovic. Musovic, I think, has a strong contender for being just the funniest Twitter account going. She is incredibly hilarious, and I don't think a lot of the time she realises quite how funny she is. But yeah, the Scotland squad is interesting. Again, obviously had a change in management themselves. And I think it'll be really interesting to see. Again, they brought some of the big names back, Caroline Weir and Lisa Evans returning, who are really experienced sort of players. Pedro Martinez Loza playing a really attacking formation in the last game, and they scored plenty of goals. But I think ultimately what they really need to be trying to do is building around that core of world-class players. I wouldn't disagree with that, to be honest. I wouldn't disagree with what Tony's saying there. I would really, as I've said, I would really like Leicester set, partly due to the fact that from a purely biased point of view, I like seeing sides that invest in their women's side rewarded for the investment. And West Ham have done it historically, but are now pulling the investment. Birmingham is just an absolute shambles of a situation, and that's one where you feel the FA and the WSL should really be stepping in, sorting that out, because it's not fair on the players to be in such a farcical situation. And I've got no surprise that so many of them jumped ship to Aston Villa, and Carla Ward jumped ship to Aston Villa. As I've said earlier, I didn't want to mention Liverpool again, but Liverpool's treatment of the women's team is disgraceful, and I won't say anything other on the matter. Tottenham historically haven't been brilliant for it, although they've got better under Rhiannon Skinner, because she's sort of pretty much pushing that culture. And I want to see Leicester stay up, because I think the WSL is better when you've got teams that are committed and actually want to invest and want to grow the game. And that's, I think, what the focus needs to be on at the moment.
Rob, last one then. Where can everyone find you before you go?
So if you want to keep up with my mad ramblings, at RJP Journalism on Twitter. If you want to follow the CSW Social, which is much more interesting and much more, better than me, it's at the CSW Social. I know, really imaginative. We also have the men's version of it, which is at the Chelsea Social. Currently, we're actually under a dispute with Twitter over copyright, so it's at the Chelsea Social too, while we sort that one out. So that's been wonderful fun in the last few weeks. But yeah, we're also on Instagram, the Chelsea Social, and the CSCW Social. And also, yeah, if you do ever find yourself around Kings Meadow for whatever reason, if you'd like to go and watch Champions, I'm usually down there, so do come over and say hello, and I will happily, bore you with tales as to why N'Golo Conte, I think, is still the greatest player that we've signed in the last 10 years. I always love a good, I always love chatting to sort of fans about any sort of level of the sport. I've grown up in a household that my dad is an Oxford United fan, who I live in Maidenhead, so I go to Maidenhead United games. So I see football ranging from Chelsea's sort of, Champions League exploits to watching Maidenhead in National League, sort of in the National League up against sort of teams that I've heard of but couldn't really point out on a map. And I've seen Oxford go between League One, League Two, and the National League as well. So I have quite a checkered sort of football history myself.
Yeah, right, Rob. Thank you for coming on. You've been a great guest tonight. Hopefully we'll catch up again soon. Yeah,
absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers, mate. Thank you. That was Rob. Fantastic guest tonight. Guys, as always, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you can find us at Leicester Fan TV. A big thank you to these guys: ADT, Hollogram, Tiger, Peter Pizzeria, Pukka Pies, Pinky Leasing, Leicester Riders, the Foxes Arms, Newby Co, and Hope Against Cancer. Thank you to all the sponsors. Smash a like, guys, if you've enjoyed the show tonight. Share it. Subscribe to Leicester Fan TV if you're new watching tonight. It'd be much appreciated as always to help us grow. Tony Fisher, it's good to see you giving the women's game some time. My prediction, Birmingham will go down. Well, it remains to be seen at the end of the season. Tony, there's a long way to go yet. My prediction is still that Leicester City will stay up. I will always back the women and back my team. So it's good to see the women's game has come as big as it is now and making a name for itself. So congratulations. And really hope everyone gets involved in the women's game this season. Go down and watch the women against Manchester City. Go and support them at Burton against Everton in the Continental Cup. So yeah, go and do that. It'd be much appreciated. The girls will love every second of hearing the fans getting behind them. So yeah, go and support them as much as you can. It's only £7 a ticket, so it's not bad. It's very good value for money. Right, guys, coming up on Leicester Fan TV then. So tomorrow night, we've got the away fan chat shows back as I'm joined by Manchester United. The Premier League prediction show with Tom is back this Thursday. I'll be joining Tom. So go and check that out. The pre-match show with Reedy, all things Leicester City ahead of Manchester United, that extra team talk. With Reedy and the guest that he gets on. The watch along returns Saturday for the men as they take on Manchester United. King Power, John Elijah from 2:00. And the aftermath show with Jamie, post-match analysis at 9:30. Let's get the last comment in. Yes, glad to see the women's team coverage. Thank you very much, Free. Pleasure as always. Right, guys, this is Jack from Leicester Fan TV saying good night. And I will see you tomorrow night at 7:30. So come and join me then. Bye-bye for now.
Thanks for watching Leicester Fan TV. Thanks to our sponsors, ADT Taxis, Everards, Pukka Pies, Pink Car Leasing, Leicester Riders, Hollogram, The Fox's Arms, Peter's Pizzeria, Hope Against Cancer, and Newby Co estate agents. Make sure to follow us on all of our social channels at Leicester Fan TV. Visit our website, leicesterfantv.com.